Joe Rogan gives his podcast over to Spotify for $100 million and Call Her Daddy implodes right before our very eyes. And we have yet another podcast here to talk about all of that and more on the Anthony on Air podcast. Jay Sabs and Frankie C are here. Welcome aboard, guys.
Hello.
Let's talk about the state of podcasting, because in the last week we have really seen a lot of crazy podcast moves, and it's been just crazy to see what's been going on with the medium. It's very interesting, and if anybody's listening to a podcast, which this is, you're probably interested in it too. So Joe Rogan sold his podcast to Spotify for $100 million. Now, it's an interesting thing because he doesn't exactly sell the podcast over. He basically is just selling the rights to distribution for the podcast. And what that means is his podcast is going to move over to Spotify, where it never has been before, and then it'll be exclusively available through Spotify. So Spotify doesn't even own. I like how Janita's feverishly trying to keep the baby quiet.
Sorry. Of course.
Interesting. Shut up.
Shut the fuck.
Did she want to start with Call Her Daddy? Is that why she's
I think so.
upset?
She just nudged me and said, "Call her daddy."
So basically, Spotify just bought the rights to hold the Joe Rogan podcast for $100 million. But they also
Good for him.
bought the video rights too, which is pretty huge and a pretty big slam against YouTube, because he's one of the biggest podcasters, one of the biggest stars on YouTube is Joe Rogan. But what's really insane is, he gets to continue to sell the show himself. So Spotify doesn't get to, well, they'll get to put ads against it, I'm sure, but he gets to keep the revenue that he has for all his sponsors, which means that he's making, and we estimate that Joe Rogan makes around $30 million a year on his podcast ads alone. Yeah.
Good Lord.
He had 190 million downloads, I believe, last month. So he is...
I think we came just shy of that. We're up there.
Well, and what's crazy is you know, people are still stuck on the old ways, and they're making a big deal out of Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert. And it's like, when you look at the amount of people that these entities touch, Joe Rogan reaches far more people than almost anything else that we have, which is why he's garnering the money that we have. Which is kind of crazy to think about, because people really don't really view Joe Rogan as this huge deal, but he's bigger than most people think. And I think this $100 million Spotify deal is the first time that people are going to start to really notice what's going on in the podcasting world. So he, on top of the $100 million he gets to cash with Spotify, is going to bring in $30 million in sales alone, just for, selling ads on his own show, which is pretty insane. Frank's internet cannot handle the amount of information I just fed out there.
My internet is having a seizure right now.
It's mind blowing.
I don't know what is going on with this thing. Every time I start talking.
Go ahead.
Anyway. That is just a crazy number, and I like Joe Rogan's podcast. It's a really good one. I think the key, anybody could interview anybody. Right. He's good at it, but the guests that he gets, for some reason, he gets anybody.
Why?
He could get anybody on his show, and that's what brings in all these numbers, because it's like, Elon Musk, he'll get Neil deGrasse Tyson, he'll get literally anybody from any walk of life, and he asks some straightforward shit. He's not holding back anything, so that's what people want to say.
That's true, and I think he's great. And you're right; the guests do make the episodes pop. That's certainly helped his growth over the years. But you have to look at what he's done too. He's been doing this for 10 years straight.
Really?
Yeah, and I think he does one every day.
He's doing them now 3 or 4 times a week. Now I think he might have gone to daily in this during this time, but he's doing them quite often and quite frequently now because they're basically paying the bills for him. He doesn't do Fear Factor anymore. He doesn't, he does MMA.
Why would he have to?
Yeah, he doesn't really have to. This is what, and he's on record saying like, this is what I love to do. So this is what I'm going to continue to do. The fact of the matter is what you said is true though, Frank, because even on this podcast, the first iteration of this podcast, some of our biggest numbers were driven by the celebrities that we had on the show. So if I did a celebrity interview, I would see the numbers.
Janine, we're not big enough. We got to get a little more famous, and then
but
we'll
you know
what?
Up. We have made a conscious effort not to do a interview podcast. Like that could easily be done. Like I said, the first iteration of the show was exactly that. But that's not what I want to do. I don't want to interview stars, and I'm sure we'll have guests. I'll put a guest on eventually.
But not so much interview as much as just make them part of the show.
Right.
Like when we had the guy from
the Shock 8 o'clock Shock group.
Yeah. That he was just part of. We weren't really interviewing. He was just another host.
But celebrity names will no doubt about it, like raise the average a little bit. But it's also putting it out there for, a consistent amount of time for over 10 years is what's raised his profile.
Yeah.
To the status. So it's kind of great. But it represents a real seismic shift because Spotify is willing to shell out $100 million just to have the rights to have the podcast. They got nothing else. And they've been out there buying other podcasts. They bought Gimlet. They bought The Ringer. They've bought other things. They didn't really buy this. They just kind of bought just to have him on their platform and be nowhere else. So essentially,
did they have any conditions? I mean, because Joe Rogan made out like a bandit with this. If he doesn't have to, do anything for
he doesn't have to do
Spotify.
He doesn't have to do a single thing. And there's two important things with this. The other reason why Joe is so valuable is because he is essentially making what CNN is making. CNN employs thousands of people and their costs are through the roof. Joe Rogan employs 5 people. I mean, he's basically doing what CNN is doing with one microphone and an internet connection. It's kind of crazy. The other part of it is
a news company has in-field reporting and stuff like that.
Right.
He's not doing any of that.
None of that. He's got no cost. Like they're both bringing in around the same, like they're both getting the same amount of digital reach. He is just using far less cost. He's pocketing a lot more profit off of what he's doing than what they're doing. Right. It's two different things, but still, just to kind of put it together to show people. The other interesting thing is Spotify's stock jumped so high in the announcement of this that they've almost practically paid for the $100 million already because the value of the stock has gone up so much by this move. Because they got one of the
good thing I'm in the involved in the stock market.
They got one of the big names to come on their platform, and he's not going to be anywhere else. So if you want Joe Rogan, you're going to have the Spotify app to get him. And now they're just going to have a bunch more people on their platform, which is kind of crazy, which makes you look at Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and wonder what the hell they're doing, because Spotify is basically doing what YouTube did 15 years ago. YouTube started, people were uploading stuff. Nobody knew what it was. Then they wanted to start showing.
The difference is YouTube is free.
Yeah, but YouTube started when they started introducing their ad product. They couldn't get major brands to advertise. So what they did was they went out and they got established people to start putting content on YouTube. And now that's basically now it's an even split. You will see Tonight Show material and CNN and Fox News on your YouTube algorithm as much as you'll see a podcast or a vlogger or whatever, because they're trying to get that split right for ad revenues. And this is
weird,
essentially
though. With YouTube, I don't know what their algorithms are, but stuff that I actually subscribe to, I rarely see that stuff in my feed. Like when I open up YouTube, there's people that I subscribe to that put up stuff every week, and I never see it.
It's a conspiracy, Frank.
It is a conspiracy.
That's possible. That's possible.
It's Fox News and President Trump messing with your algorithm, I think is what it is.
Gotta be.
Yeah.
Gotta be.
Does it direct
what
you
else could
to
it be?
Fox News, Frank?
I see some of that. Sure.
Okay.
I think a lot of times, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, I think they give you a fair amount of stuff on the other side because it actually gets you angry and keeps you clicking on stuff like more.
No.
I think so. That's why.
Maybe it's like there's probably a news thing
Clickbait.
where you have to have some kind of fair balance of stuff, like with political advertising
On YouTube,
there's got to be a
none.
fair balance.
Yeah, on YouTube,
I
none.
don't know.
YouTube's objective is keep you on YouTube. So they're just going to keep giving you
That's
stuff
true.
that will keep you there longer, which is, again, the other great thing about Joe Rogan, because he puts up 2-hour-long shows, 3-hour-long shows, and people watch most of it. That's another point. This podcast certainly is not in the same realm as Joe Rogan's podcast, but we do see the same sort of results that the people that come to watch or listen want to watch and listen. So they'll be here for the duration of the episode.
Thanks for staying.
Yeah, thank you for staying. Whereas you might click in and watch 5 minutes of the Tonight Show, hear the jokes in the beginning, and then you're like, all right, that's
That's true.
And also with Joe Rogan stuff, like he has a 2 or 3 hour thing, but he has, I guess, people there who are chopping it up into segments. And you could just watch the 10-minute thing when you talk to this person about whatever. And you don't have to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's been something that's been done in the last 2 to 3 years, which is the clips, which has been a popular part of promoting podcasts, which is also something that we do. We'll put a minute clip out of the show to help push, and that pushes viewership and listening for the bigger episode.
Clickbait.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of a thing there. Oh, look at the two of you holding your bundles of joy.
Can you actually see this thing?
A little bit, yes. This thing. If you're listening, Jean is talking about her child.
That thing that she mentioned.
Yeah.
Child.
So that's the crazy part about Joe Rogan. It's an insane amount of money for really they're not getting much other than to have exclusivity of his podcast, and yet the freaking thing almost paid for itself in the first day.
I have a question though about him.
About Joe Rogan?
Was he ever on radio?
He was on TV a lot.
Yeah,
TV, yes.
Joe's
not radio, right?
Joe's quick story is he was a stand-up comedian. Actually, he was a fighter first.
Right.
Was getting the piss knocked out of him and was like, this isn't a way to make a living, and decided to do stand-up comedy. So he did stand-up, and he started going around doing stand-up comedy, and he actually he cites Opie and Anthony. He cites Tom Green. There's a couple of people like from early on where he was like, I see what you guys are doing, and I'm going to do the same sort of things. There were a couple of outlets and things that he was looking at. It was like, I think I could do my own like little podcast and make it good. And that's just basically how it started in his basement, and he just grew it from there. I think he moved it out.
Another thing that kind of
ahead.
pushed him up a little bit was when he was doing stand-up comedy. He was one of the few that were pointing out plagiarism.
Oh, really?
Like other comics stealing jokes.
He had a big thing with Carlos Mencia from a few years ago where he called Carlos Mencia out for stealing material, which was a huge controversy in the stand-up comedy world because at the time Carlos Mencia was doing Mind Mencia on Comedy Central, and he was the biggest comedian ever. Mm-hmm. And at the Comedy Store...
He called him out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, big time. At the Comedy Store... which is kind of like the Comedy Cellar, but for LA, where all the comics go. You can go there, you could pay $10 and you could see comedians that usually charge $100 a ticket because they're just there working out material, doing short sets. He went there and he called him out, and the Comedy Store actually told Joe Rogan to cut it because they needed Carlos Mencia. He was drawing big for them at the time. People wanted to come because they wanted to see if Carlos Mencia would be there that night, so they were making a ton of money. And they actually excommunicated Joe from the store.
Oh, really?
Which is weird because he was at the store when Mencia was on stage, and he actually got up on stage and called him out in front of the audience live.
He did.
As Mencia was doing his act. And they gave him a microphone.
Yes. Yeah,
and
they did.
He was out there talking to the audience, telling people why Carlos Mencia is, how he did it, like who he stole from, and he was like just calling him out on everything.
Well, what's amazing about that too is Joe Rogan maybe doesn't even exist today if there wasn't somebody filming him and following him at the time, which was a friend of his, I believe. I don't know, I forget the guy's name, but a friend of his was actually filming the whole episode that Frank's talking about. And they put that on YouTube. And if you go look at that now, that's got bazillion views. Like, that was one of the things that really popped and put him over in a big way. And by the way,
what came first, that or his TV career? Because he was on, I feel like that was later, and he was on like news radio.
Yeah, he was already on. Well,
stuff.
The big break for him was news radio, which he got relatively quickly.
Right.
I think they passed on Ray Romano. I think they had Ray Romano and fired him, and then hired somebody else and fired him, and then gave that role to Joe Rogan.
But I think his most infamous for, what's it called? Making the girls flash. What's it called?
Making the girls
He didn't
flash.
do that.
Did
Talking
he?
about
No, that
Girls
was
Gone Wild?
That was Opie and Anthony.
Oh,
Girls Gone Wild is Joe Rogan.
No, that's not Joe Rogan.
No, that's not him. No.
No, that's not.
I don't
Joe
think that's him. No, that's some other guy that didn't he like go to jail or he got
Do
sued
the
or
Google.
something.
Do the Google.
I don't want to Google Girls
His
Gone Wild.
name. Yeah, I know that's gonna really. His name might be Joe, the guy who did Girls Gone Wild. Whatever happened to Girls Gone Wild?
I don't know. I never did that.
So what happened with this other podcast? Someone flipped out?
Joe Francis was the guy who.
I always get them confused.
Yeah, that was a different guy.
Joe
By
Francis.
the way, back to the algorithm thing. I am so protective of my iPad with my kids because all they want to watch is Blippi and garbage. And when I let them do it once, I let them watch stuff on my thing. I started getting suggestions for Blippi and all that, and I'm like, no, get out of my. I feel like I've honed my algorithm on YouTube that has everything that I want on it.
Exactly.
So you got to like sign out or something and have their own like the kid account. So they can only mess with their own algorithm.
Yeah, so on my phone and my iPad is mine, and I have YouTube on my TV, but that's a signed out account because I can't have it messing with my algorithm. It's messed up.
You get lost in that crap.
What, you don't want to watch Blippi?
No, I am more protective of my algorithm than I am my bank passwords. It's ridiculous. It's easier.
Funny.
Let me tell you something. It's easier to fix a stolen debit card or
I agree.
than to fix that
to
algorithm.
rework your algorithm.
I agree.
It really is.
True. You know how many videos you got to watch to rework your algorithm?
It's yeah. And then you ever get that like one video that pops up and you're like, oh God, I do kind of want to see what this is. But if I click on this, I'm going to have a year's worth of this friggin'.
That is
It's
true.
like, fine, I'll watch this Taylor Swift thing. I mean, they're suggesting it, so I got to watch it.
I mean, I guess I should.
Yeah.
I mean, what am I going to do?
So the second part of this is Call Her Daddy. So this is part of Barstool Sports, which is a really interesting company unto itself. Really great company.
I need to work there.
They catch a lot of criticism for some of the things that they do, but I really feel like it's companies like these that are going to be the future. They found this podcast that was being done by this girl who I believe she was dating Noah Syndergaard at the time. I'm not 100% sure of the timeline here, but she did wind up dating Noah Syndergaard. So she was popping up in the New York Post and Page Six and all that kind of stuff. So she was getting a fair amount of publicity of like, this is the gal who nailed, who's tied down Thor, because they call him Noah Syndergaard Thor.
Tied down
Right.
and nailing.
And nailing, exactly.
Tied down and nailed. Yep.
Giving Thor
That's
the
how they
old
worded
hammer. So they started doing a podcast, and I think they were, I don't know how many episodes in when Barstool Sports found them. The guy, Dave, who does the pizza reviews. And so they gave them a deal, and they put them on Barstool Sports, which was pretty interesting because that was viewed as a sexist company at the time that didn't really do much for women. And then here comes this podcast hosted by two women, which, for lack of a better term and to save some time, was kind of like a current day Sex in the City podcast version, right? Is that offensive, Janine?
Oh man.
Like they would talk about dating and their sex life, but that's what Sex in the City was. They represent
Right.
almost essentially the same thing, you know?
Like, what are they going to talk about? Star Wars stuff? No.
Right?
Why not? Why can't women talk about Star Wars?
Because it's
Oh,
nerdy.
God. No, I agree. Yeah, it's like a modern day Sex in the City.
They were talking about the things that were important to them in their world, and they attracted a.
But was it geared around sports or no?
No, that's what was very interesting, and that's what a lot of people had a hard time understanding, because they take Barstool Sports and they just put it in this little box of that's a bunch of sexist guys, you know, who hate women and blah blah blah, and here they are. They have the biggest female podcast on the planet.
Yep.
And we didn't know any of this really until it all came out afterwards. But they did pull back the curtain on the economics of it, which is interesting that Joe Rogan is happening at the same time. And we're seeing what he's doing and the value of what he's becoming, because you can see that this really is the golden era and maybe the beginning of the golden era of podcasting. So he finds this little known podcast. They had no downloads, no real audience. I mean, maybe there was something there a little bit. Whatever it was, wasn't what it became. And they decided to put it on the platform of Barstool Sports. Now, one thing that Barstool is really good at is marketing. They're very good at putting things through their little machine and it blowing up and having a huge audience on the other side, right? So they put this little thing through their machine, and sure enough, it explodes through the roof. So we only found out these facts and figures after the fact, but this is what happened. The podcast blew up. The two hosts who were friends thought we could be doing way better than what we're doing. So they went back to Barstool to renegotiate. The same time, one of the girls was dating a guy who works at HBO. This is how the story goes. This is according to things that are in the Post and things that I've read and heard. Dating a guy at HBO. The guy at HBO, the boyfriend goes, I can get you guys a better deal. Goes and shops the podcast around. Gets a deal from another podcast network called Wondery, right? And so they go back and they decide we're going to not, we want more money. They start asking for more money. They start asking for more things from Barstool. Barstool is trying to negotiate with them, but they're like, is this in good faith that you guys going to come back? Because in the midst of all this, they basically just stopped doing their podcast. They stopped doing the uploads and everything.
Didn't sign any contract or anything?
They signed a contract. I'm gonna fill you in on the numbers in a second. You're gonna lose your mind probably. So they're at this stalemate, and basically one of them decides that they want to go back to Barstool because the offer that they had gotten was so great and lucrative that it was better than what they were probably getting over at Wondery. And the other one got mad that the other one wanted to go back, so this all fell apart. So it basically got to the point where they had to explain why the podcast wasn't there anymore. And here's what happened. When they hired them at first, they gave them a deal that each one would be making $75,000 a year, right? And they put in performance bonuses per download. So if they reached a certain milestone, if they hit number one or whatever it was, they would get performance bonuses. Within the first year, they hit so many bonuses, they made $500,000 a piece, up from their $75,000 base salary.
I see why they're complaining.
So there's one of two things here. One, this is kind of what happens in business and in sports and everything else, right? You go into sports and you sign an entry-level deal and you're making no money and you're scoring more goals and you have more assists than the guy that's making $4 million that's been in there for years, right? And you're sitting there making league minimum $875,000. This happens all the time in sports. This happens with actors on a TV show. You go and you do a pilot. Will it be good or not? You know, what James Gandolfini was making for the pilot of The Sopranos is not what he was making in year 6. You know, he had to negotiate it and get to that point. So it's like one of those things. So they were sitting there making $75,000, even with the $500,000 in bonuses going, we're worth a lot more than what we're getting. And thus they started their renegotiations. And now it's gotten to the point where I don't know where it is now. It's kind of fallen apart where Barstool started offering them so much to come back. And then there was this other deal. And then they started fighting with one another. And then one of them was like, I'll come back. We don't even need the other one. You know, we'll sub him out
Barstool.
like Menudo style. Well, let me tell you the genius of Barstool. I mean, I gotta really give it to them. This move was friggin' brilliant. So this is the quagmire that they're in. They had this other deal elsewhere. Who knows if it's, by the way, they signed a 3-year contract. And this all fell apart at the end of year 1. So Barstool still owns them for 2 more years.
So they couldn't do $75,000 a year for 3 years and then do something different while Janine passes out or whatever the hell just happened. Hey, welcome back.
Janine, you want me to get? All right, I'll give Janine some time. Although I am enjoying her reactions, I can still see you.
You know
Janine.
what we should do? We should just replace Janine with her baby. Just hold like the baby up. Have her do the rest of the show.
By the way, I'd like to see the Call Her Daddy girls do a show trying to put a baby to sleep. Look at Janine being Mother of the Year here, podcasting and baby taken care of. Look at that baby.
You make it look easy.
Oh my God, she looks like your husband.
There you go. So it's the 3 of us now.
All right, we'll give you a minute there, Janine.
Yeah, go ahead. Take your time.
Go ahead. So she, so this was year 1 of 3 where it all fell apart, and they couldn't. So now, my point is here's the genius of Barstool. The girls may have overplayed their hand a little bit, right? Because they thought they were certainly worth more than what they were getting, but perhaps not enough of what they were fighting for. Barstool, when they first discovered them, bought the IP of the show, meaning they called the podcast Call Her Daddy, and they had to give that to Barstool, which makes total sense because if a company is going to put you into their marketing machine, you know, they should reap all the benefits of putting your logo on T-shirts and all that stuff, right? Totally makes sense. It's an acquisition at the end of the day. Barstool was willing to give that back to them and let them walk out the door with it, which is crazy to think about when they've shown
to cancel everything. Just saying, we're going to cancel everything. Here's your stuff back. Let's go separate ways.
They were so desperate to just get them back on the air and podcasting that they were willing, because they had just stopped doing the podcast. So they were negotiating. They were like, if you come back and just start doing episodes again, we'll give you the IP and you can walk away at the end of the year. They just like wanted them to finish out the year. I mean, it was so much to the fact because basically, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. You know, they're trying to make money as a company. This is a huge revenue stream for them. But if they're not doing it, they're not making the money off of it. So that's how
insane. There's got to be some kind of breach on their end. Like, you're not giving us the content.
Exactly, because they did sign a contract to do X amount of episodes. Oh, you know, but Barstool basically owned them. But Barstool was willing to renegotiate the deal to make it all, work. So the genius of Barstool is here we are right now at this point. And what do they do to exaggerate the fact that these girls overplayed their hands? They turn around and they reach out and they say, hey, if anybody thinks that they can do a podcast just as good as these girls, send us your podcast and we'll take a look at it. Which I wholeheartedly, do I think they're going to listen to what people send in? Maybe a couple, but But I think the added bonus of doing that is what it shows to the other two girls, the original hosts, which is
Yeah.
you overplayed your hand and you can be replaced. And, because we're yet to see if it's, it's probably equal parts everything. It's probably equal parts these girls' talent, the Barstool machine. It's a little bit of everything. But if you tweak things here or there and you sub somebody in and out, they replaced Darren on Bewitched, which was like the biggest show at the time. Nobody even really noticed, right? That machine kept going.
Yeah, that
Wow.
was fine. It depends on. I've never watched the show. It depends on their chemistry and their knowledge of whatever they were talking about. But you can't just replace them with anybody. But
Well, that's the
it's
thing,
not
right?
impossible.
Two girls talking about their sex lives. You think that's pretty easy, but at the end of the day, sometimes what people bring to the table really is important, and it can't be replaced. You don't really know, but the genius move of them to be like, "Hey, send in your submissions if you think you can do better," puts pressure on them to get back in the studio and get back to work.
Yeah, that's also a good promotional tool for them to get more clicks. I mean,
so Joe Rogan has been the #1 podcast for a really long time. We're
second.
He'll maybe trade places with
right there, Janine.
He'll maybe trade places with somebody on occasion, but for the most part, he's pretty high up there. The guy who runs Barstool Sports took the Call Her Daddy feed and uploaded an episode where he explained what happened, and that beat Joe Rogan out for the #1 spot.
I'll have to go listen to that one.
Which, again, to tie these two things in again, if you look at every article that's come out about Joe Rogan signing his big $100 million Spotify deal, they show the podcast ranks, and in that shows Joe Rogan at #2 and Call Her Daddy in at #1. Ooh. Which was pretty amazing because they hadn't released an episode in like a month or 2 months or whatever it was. And this was the only thing that they had released, and it had skyrocketed to the top because their audience was so hungry to find out what had happened to them. They just went black. They went dry. So
could this all be a big promotional ploy in conjunction, like in cooperation with Barstool and Call Her Daddy?
So I think
let's do this big thing, and then at the end of the month we'll release this episode, and it's going to be the huge thing.
Part of it was. So I think because what happened in the span of this time with everybody arguing, when the two girls kind of were hitting heads, and the one girl went back to Barstool and was like, "I'm willing to come back." During that time, they started a thing that was like, I forget what they call it, Free the Daddies or Free the Fathers or something. And they were trying to sell shirts. That was concocted by Barstool.
Oh.
But everything else that had led up to that, because they were trying to recoup the money. So to answer your question, no, because they would be making a ton more money if they were just putting out episodes on a weekly basis.
The publicity that this is getting now.
Oh, it's huge for them. Yeah, it's huge for them and there's this other weird thing where people who don't care about Barstool Sports, all Call Her Daddy, will get hooked into this because it's become such a New York media controversial story. People just want to look at the car accident as they drive by.
Sure,
it's true.
Is basically
and
what's
plus,
happening.
so many people do podcasts. They're interested in the ins and outs and the negotiation stuff, and it might help them in the long run.
Right.
So, I mean, just with these two events, it's funny that they're happening at the same time. They're sort of intertwined with one another. It's pretty interesting how it's all gone down in the last week, but it's really pulled the curtain back on where podcasts are and how valuable and important they are to our world right now.
They are.
I mean,
we're important.
We're essential to the
essential workers right here.
We're essential workers.
How could you go through your life without us?
Janine is the only one doing that essential work.
Yeah. No, I can't believe that Joe Rogan makes that much money.
He didn't always.
It's obscene.
Like, isn't he like not really well liked though? Like, meaning like people think he's an asshole.
I hear mixed
I'm
things.
sure there are some, but
Yeah, I hear mixed things about him, which reminds me, we have to talk about why Ellen is an ass. We never.
oh yeah, you've been holding off on this one. What happened?
We can't do it now.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. We can't do it now.
Oh, come on.
We're running out of time. But I got great stuff. I got great
You
stuff.
giant tease you.
Did she just puke up?
I have to show you this.
Oh God, here it comes.
Ah.
Nice. There's the cover of this podcast.
Better than the other white stuff on the floor. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
See, I should submit something to that Barstools. Just kidding, guys. I would never leave you. Never, never, never. For 500,000, never. For 75,000, never.
You
say that now.
I feel like you'd leave that baby for $75,000. Yeah, so we will talk about Ellen and why I think she stinks. But Rogan's interesting where he doesn't, again, this is not a comparison, but I pride myself on not really being in one camp or another. And he's kind of that same person where he's on one side with some things and other sides on other things. And every other side gets angry with him. And people really hate that. Why do I look
like I'm stuck?
Like you should be on a Christmas tree?
Frank looked like a Matrix waterfall for a second right there.
I was tripping out there for a minute.
Did you take the blue pill or the red pill, Frank?
The black and white pill.
What is it about this time where I can't get enough Oreos? I can't stop eating Oreos.
Really?
Oreos are the best. Oh my God, they're so good. You can't have it without a glass of milk, though.
Dude, I was buying 2 packages because they wouldn't let you buy more than 2 of anything every time I went to the store. So I'd have a package a week. And then
you get anything other than double stuff, you don't know what you're doing.
And then I started.
That's what she said.
I just. Then I discovered the family size bag, and I was so happy.
Double stuffed family size.
I don't do double stuffed Oreos. I think you're.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's too much white stuff.
No, there's
Things
even triple stuff, but I'm not there yet. There's triple stuffed Oreos, but I don't know if I can handle that. But double stuffed family size is the way to go.
No,
Oreos
and I'm digging the whole
but,
peel back thing.
Oh.
Yeah, they had that for like the last 15 years.
I know, I'm digging it though.
You're stuck in 1996. That was the last time you probably bought a package of Oreos.
God, why
last time you had to use
devolve into
making fun of
me for one thing because I admire the whole package thing. Whoever came up with this?
Wearing a Metallica shirt.
There's a guy out there or a woman, man or woman, who came up with this. That should get like the biggest promotion and the biggest raise.
Yeah, but it's been like that for like 20 years. You haven't noticed?
I've noticed. I'm just pointing it out because it's right. It's in my hands. I just like it.
Okay.
Leave me alone. I'm allowed to like things. God.
Oh, Frank.
Why can't I like something?
You're upsetting the baby, Frank.
She knows what I'm talking about.
All right, let's leave it there. We'll pick it up next time around. Poor Janine.
I'm being choked over here. I think it's because someone's getting a second tooth. So, any takers? This is what I'm leaving.
Good luck with all that. To quote Seinfeld.
Look at that face, though. Oh, see, she just wants the spotlight.
She
That's
just wants
what
to
it
be
is.
the spotlight. That's all. Exactly.
Oh, I guess she'll be the slutty one.
I guess she'll be the slutty one.
Okay, you won't be the slutty one. You won't be the slutty one.
Oh.
I'm digging the Munchkin Land curl, though.
Yeah, it's cute.
You like that? You like that? I did it this morning with the 1-inch curl.
Guild.
Did you really curl it?
No.
Oh, that I wouldn't put it past you. That
can't
feels
put
like
a hot curler in a baby's hair.
Wait, are we still on or no?
Yeah, we're still on.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we are.
That feels like
Mother
That's
of
my
the
still on smile.
Who knew a baby would be an awesome prop for a podcast? This has been a
Really?
blast.
No.
Yeah.
This is the first and last time, you little.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Another episode coming up soon, and make sure you guys rate and review on Apple, and we're available on Spotify, unlike Joe Rogan right now.
And every time you don't rate, review, and subscribe, the baby cries.
That's true.
It makes the baby cry.
Or I'll pinch the bee.
That's true.
What?
Yeah. Don't pinch it. See what happens?
All right, everything else is up there at anthonyonair.com. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. What she said, and we'll see you next time.